Video is meant to help you get around the document I'm providing that should help you study for the midterm exam. Okay, so this is a 15-page or so PDF, and it starts out with clean copies of the exercises that we did on sentence numbering. So these two we did in class, and this is the one that you turned in as homework on Monday. Okay, so following those 5 pages, we have a full key, and some of the answers on this are different from the ones that I gave you in green pen on Tuesday, but all of the corrections have been made, and these are all the correct numbers, so this should be a good guide for you. I provided the blank ones so that you can give them another try or test yourself, without writing it down or whatever, and then check against the key itself. Okay, so the key is complete and accurate now. And there are just a couple of things about this exercise that I want to point out. Okay, so I've also included this page that shows what happens when the context of the sentence changes the part of speech from a pronoun or a noun to an adjective, and from a noun to an adverb. Okay, so this is just something to think about. You don't have to do this, but it can help you sort of figure out what's going on in the sentence regarding the parts of speech. Okay, so pronouns like his, this, our, that can sometimes serve as adjectives, and all of these pink ones are doing just that. So when you go through and do your numbering of parts of speech, things that look like pronouns sometimes are serving as an adjective, and we want to call those adjectives. Thus, the key will tell you for this that even though in isolation the word this is a possessive pronoun, here it's serving as an adjective that modifies room. So I've outlined on this page that's also included in the PDF I'm giving you some examples of that happening in this first exercise. Okay, we also have very frequently a noun that is serving as an adjective. So of course birthday is a noun, but in this sentence it's an adjective because it's modifying this birthday present, right? So what kind of present? A birthday present. And I've highlighted in yellow examples of that here in this sheet. So one of the things to think about in terms of this distinction is a noun is always serving as itself, like present is here, when it's also serving one of these roles in or jobs in the sentence. So present in this case is a direct object. So understood subject you, do give being the subject or the predicate, and present is receiving the action of the transitive verb give. So that's the only noun that's truly serving as a noun in this sentence. We also have year here, but it is actually serving as an adverb. It is modifying give. It's saying when to give. Okay, so which year? This year. So we have the pronoun serving as the adjective. The adjective is modifying this adverb, year, right? And the whole adverbial phrase, this year, is modifying do, give. Okay, so even though if all of the words on this page were just listed out, then year would be a noun, Wednesday would be a noun. But when you place them in the context of a sentence, they become these other parts of speech. So it's not always so straightforward that the word Wednesday, which would always be a proper noun, would be serving the role of a noun in a sentence. And one of the things that it's important to keep in mind here is nouns appear in particular contexts as subjects and objects. So when they're not serving in that role, then we need to think about, like, are they modifying some other role or some other job in the sentence. Okay, so look this over, see if you can sort of grok what I'm saying here, and let me point out something else that might help. You also will have this document. Okay, when you're looking at these big long sentences, a lot of the words in them are parts of these prepositional phrases, okay? And, look over the list of prepositions on the course website and begin to start recognizing these prepositions when you see them in a sentence. This will help enormously. So what a prepositional phrase does is it modifies something else that's going on in a sentence. So taken in total, it's going to be serving as an adjective or an adverb. It's going to be modifying a subject or a predicate. So we want to sort of pluck these out, and you could almost become blind to them. They're not part of the major structure of the sentence per se. So another thing to think about here is that a prepositional phrase can be inside of another prepositional phrase. So here we have for many improvements around town, an entire prepositional phrase, right, initially, that is modifying the word credit. So this is what type of credit that is being given to Washington, Alice Washington, the mayor. And mayor, of course, being the subject here. So she's the transitive verb, give, object, credit. So the prepositional phrase is just a modification. What type of credit? Credit for many improvements around town. Now, we have another prepositional phrase inside of this, around town. So this prepositional phrase is modifying improvements, right? So it's if you were to state the entire prepositional phrase that's modifying credit, it's this whole single underlined part, right? But you have within that phrase a prepositional phrase that's modifying part of that phrase. Okay, so the phrases, they always refer back to something. Around town refers back to improvements. For many improvements around town refers back to credit. Okay, and these can be sort of nested. Okay, so here we have another example of this, and too many students in his school is modifying the word friend. What type of friend? A friend to many students in his school. So within that prepositional phrase, we have the phrase in his school modifying the object of the preposition, right? So we're setting up another preposition object within this prepositional phrase. So keep in mind that these prepositions can be nested and that they're very, very common. You'll see them everywhere in your sentences, and they're essentially serving as a modifier either of an object, a subject, a predicate, along those lines. So don't be confused. We've got a preposition here in and the object being court, right? All of this, our, counties, domestic relations court, these are all modifying court. So, you could take them all out theoretically, and the prepositional phrase would still just have the preposition and the object without all these other descriptive terms. Okay, so one way to do this exercise is to look for the prepositional phrases and isolate them first, right? I would do, simple subject, simple predicate first, and then sort of strip things down by figuring out what the prepositional phrases are and understanding that those are really just phrases that become modifiers. They become adjectives and adverbs. All right. So a couple of tricky things about the jobs in a sentence part of this assignment. We have auxiliary verbs that are part of the simple predicate. Anytime you have auxiliary verbs that are working with an action verb, those are part of the simple predicate. In this case, we have what's basically a four-word phrase, do not always turn. And the verb part of that is do turn, the helping or auxiliary verb to, the action verb turn. So the words not always are modifying, are saying how these things are going to turn, right? So, so always is the adverb, and then not is an adjective modifying the adverb, okay? So always turn, not always, right? Not is modifying always, is sort of turning it into the opposite, and always is describing how the wheels do turn, okay? So, you know, sometimes the helping verb is not right beside the action verb, but you need to know, like, these two words comprise the simple predicate, okay? Here we have a more straightforward one, should turn. Both of those words taken together are the simple predicate, okay? We have another case of the two verbs, the auxiliary verb and the action verb being separated by other modifiers, right? Not being a modifier of often, and often being a modifier of are given, right? So this is the adverb, are given how, are given often, but not is modifying often to make it mean the opposite, okay? All right, so while we're on the subject, let's think about this problem of the retained object, okay? So in a straightforward construction, subject, transitive verb, object, the subject is doing the action, right? So when a sentence is written in the passive voice, you do have subject, action verb, object. But if you think about this, the subject is not doing the action of this transitive verb. So this is called something else. This is called a retained object rather than a direct object. It acts in much the same way as the direct object, but in order to be the direct object, the subject has to be doing the transitive action and not receiving the transitive action, okay? So this sort of sets up a quandary, right? Because we know that theoretically journalists would be the indirect object. They are the thing that is receiving the object, the direct object, right, in a normal sentence. But we want to, we have to keep journalists as the subject of the sentence. So there's this other way that we describe what would be the direct object if the sentence was not written in this passive form. Okay, so in an active form, officials do not often give access to journalists to sensitive documents, right? So then journalists would be the indirect object. But in this case, the indirect, what would be the indirect object is the subject of the sentence. So we have, that's when we have the example of the retained object. Okay, I have another example of this here. So we have the subject senator, and then the verb was given, and vote, right? So if colleagues gave the senator a vote, then the senator would be the indirect object. But in this construction, the indirect object has become the subject and is not the thing that is transmitting the action of the action verb. So theoretically, the senator would give a vote, but he's actually receiving here. So that's, we again have this example of a retained object. Okay, so that one is tricky, but it only appears in this exercise in these two instances. So take a look at those sentences and try to think about that. Okay, one more thing that I want to point out here. When we have a proper noun, such as O.J. Simpson, we put all of that together, and it is its own sort of single noun, right? Butler County here is another example. So this is a case in which we group these words together. Now, what would normally be a proper noun here, as I mentioned earlier, is serving instead to modify case. So if you are deciding whether this is a noun or something, some other part of speech in this sentence, then it's serving here as an adjective modifying case. Okay, so when we have the proper nouns, we're not going to have Butler being an adjective modifying county. Rather, this whole proper noun is a noun phrase. It's the noun itself, and it's made so by virtue of its being sort of formalized and capitalized in this way.